Today, George is going to talk about the friendship that he and Betty had with Bob and Pat Rhinard.
Our relationship with Bob and Pat was very healthy and wholesome, and we enjoyed traveling with each other and had a lot of unique experiences in finding different places to spend our nights. And in many instances, we'd be driving and we'd be kind of late looking for a place, and we'd have to take whatever we could find. And sometimes we'd have to double up in our rooms and for the accommodations. But no matter where we stopped, I'd find a place where they danced, and we'd go and dance after dinner and just had a lot of fun, because both Bob and Pat loved to dance, and I enjoyed Bob, who used to do a lot of boxing, and he had a sort of a shuffle gait with them as though he was boxing, and he was it was kind of interesting to see how he reacted, and he was a fun, well, they were both really enjoyed laughing, and we could always find something to enjoy, whether the combinations were good or bad, but we made the most of each situation. And then we would do this just in our rooms just before going to, after a few drinks, then we did our charades, and we played whatever games we played. Betty and Pat would always beat Bob and I, card games or whatever kind of. We were always playing some form of a game where we competed against each other, and we did this with a lot of laughter and enjoying our Manhattans while we were doing our little song and dance bits. And this was going on almost after every night, where we find a new place, we would have a new routine. And so each night was a different routine with a lot of new laughters and a lot of gaiety among the both of us.
And when you were traveling, you'd stop at the roadside?
Oh, and during the day on our long trips, we always had packed a lunch so we could stop at a roadside table and have a tete-a-tete dinner, and we had our Manhattan. We'd circulate around the table and just chatting with each other as though we were just on a benefit for the first time. So we just, each situation was a new and fun situation.
And Betty and Pat were only children.
Yeah, Pat and was an only daughter in her family, and Betty was the only daughter, so they really bonded together, being only girls in their families. And they enjoyed each other so much that they almost felt like they were sisters. And they did a lot of laughing together, joking together, and just did a lot of things spontaneously. And I just can't express how much joy we had in being together with them and all our trips into Canada and northern Michigan. And each day was a new day of laughter and happiness.
Do you recall how you met originally?
How we met? Well, of course, Betty and I were living in Homer, and Pat, and Bobby applied for a job as a superintendent of high schools in the Homer public school system. And as a result, Betty was pretty active in the PTA group with the school. And of course, Bob was very athletic, and we did a lot of sporting events after we got to know each other, and enjoyed many happy days. And go to Ann Arbor to watch Michigan play football, and well, Bob and I would always go to all the games. The girls didn't go. And this one game we were watching, the game we were sitting in the bleachers, and there were 4 girls behind us, and their husbands were behind them. And the husbands were passing the drinks around to their wives, trying to get them loaded, and the girls would they did, without their husbands' knowledge, they would pass the drinks to Bob and I, and their husbands thought that the girls were drinking the drinks that they gave for the girls, but Bob and I were doing the drinking, and they were pretty hilarious because they thought that the girls are going to get soused. But in the meanwhile, we had a great time. The girls laughed, and the guys laughed, thinking they were succeeding with their ploy, and Betty and I, not Betty, but Bob and I were laughing because we were having the drinks on with the gals at one of the Michigan football games. So that was a fun evening. And we would do a lot of things, like crazy things, like in any social event that we went to, we always participated with our Manhattans, and just a wonderful relationship with both Bob and Pat.
And did Bob retire in Homer, or did they move away?
Well, Bob accepted the superintendency in Lakeview, so he moved out of Homer. He was principal at Homer at that time, but he got the superintendency job at Lakeview. So they moved up to Lakeview, and as a result, on weekends, Betty and I would drive up and spend the weekends with them, or they would come down to Homer and spend the weekends with us. And all of them, every evening we always had our games that we played. We played charades, and no matter how the games were scored, Betty and I, or Bob and I, always lost. We couldn't beat them. They were too smart for us.
And how about your kids? Your kids and Bob and Pat's kids, did they pal around as well?
Yeah, well, our son Tom and Doug, Bob Rhinards' son, became very close, almost like close blood brothers. And they did a lot of rituals together as blood brothers. So their relationship was great. And of course, I'm trying to think of the girl's name now. Their daughter was close to Betty. I can't recall her name. But Tom and Dougie, their son, were very close.
And what about Dave?
Pardon me?
And their son Dave?
And Dave and Norm were very close. So we each had our own partners and did our own things together, but as a family we were always together, all the boys and girls. And each had their, Dave and Norm had their, whatever hobbies or whatever, they participated very well together. And Tom and Doug did the same. They were just very, very close.
How many years do you think this friendship went on for? Was it a decade, 2 decades?
That's a good question. About 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, and then after they left Homer, we were still pretty close to them, and our boys were very close to their sons. And Carol and Deborah, their daughter, were close, but not as close as the boys were with each other. And so we always had our relationships with our individuals, and we enjoyed whatever we were doing together.
And then how did that friendship, the 4 of you, how did that fit in with some of your other friends in town? Maury and Mary Lou and the others? Were they separate groups, or were you all one big group?
Bob was the superintendent of Homer, and they had a good relationship with his staff. And on the staff we had Mary Lou McCullough and Millie and Howard Andrews. And as couples they paired with Pat and Bob and Betty and me. And we did a lot of things jointly with the groups too, and there were others in the group, but we were closer with the Rhinards at that time. And they went as a group every Friday. We would go out to eat someplace, some restaurant in town or out of town, and did a lot of trips out of town as a group. And Millie Ann, Howard Andrews, Maury McCullough, Mary Lou, and Betty Blue, and Bob. And I did this with each with the groups, trying to think how to do it possibly. So this group with the pairs, Mary Lou and Maury, Howard and Millie, Betty and I, and Bob Odell, and Betty Odell, and we did a lot of things with those, with the couple. We did it collectively together.
And then at some point, both Bob and Pat died, and then the rest of the group, you kind of stayed together, didn't you?
Yeah, well, when we were in practice, George's birthday in March, on March the 6th, and we were over and celebrated George's birthday and dropped off our presents. Then on our way home, we stopped at Pat and Bob's because they lived on our way home. And we had a real fun evening that night with them, and we had our Manhattans, we had our Glenn Miller record played, and we did our dancing and so forth. And we got late, so we started going to go home. Pat and Bob, they wanted us to spend the night with them. And we just know it was too late because we were out with George. So we left Pat and Bob around so 1 o'clock at night after dancing and having our social take-to-take as we always did. And they wanted, and when we were getting ready to leave, they wanted, hey, spend the night. We just thought, no, you're going to go home. And so we went home. We left around after 1 o'clock. And that night, at around 4 or 5 in the morning, we get a call from Bob, and he says, Pat just died.
Mm.
Of course, that shook us all up, and it shook Bob up. And he was very depressed because he and Pat were so close. And after the funeral, Bob and I really, we associated each other very closely because he needed somebody close to him. And we did little trips. I was calling on customers. I'd take Bob with me. So we traveled on business trips, so we were always together. And of course, it really shook him up, and well, look at the husband. But they were very close. And that was pretty sad, and he was a very gregarious person, and as a result, with his Pat lost Betty and I, we were very close with them. We spent a lot of time with them, and when I did some calling on customers, I always would take Bob with me, and when he wanted to do some socializing, we were always together. And then because Bob, like any good husband, was very devastated when Pat died, and so were we all. And as a result, but he and I were more closer. We did more things together. Just I'd take him on trips that I was going on and calling on customers and smoothies, because he just hated to be alone. So we were all together. But I would go out to dinner with them and take him, I'd have him over for dinner. We had a real close, loving relationship with tragedy, losing Pat.
All right, well, thank you very much, George.